Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger.
The following program may contain coarse language, adult themes, and bad attempts at humor. Listener discretion is advised.
What is President Trump's goal? What is his vision? He wants to put an American flag on Mars.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
I am JEFF, a cosmic bard over on X, and this is the Lost Wanderer podcast for March 22nd, 2026, produced from the Listening Post Studios and simulcast on KLRN Radio. We're coming to you tonight from the ACS Serenade Observatory, orbiting high above the night side of Earth, where the lights of cities trace the continents below us. Satellites are drifting silently along their long arcs, and beyond the thin blue edge of the atmosphere, the wider universe awaits in the dark. There are moments in spaceflight when a headline will sound technical, almost bureaucratic, like something only propulsion engineers and procurement officers could possibly remotely love. This is not one of those moments, because when NASA says it has picked a new upper stage for the Space Launch System, what it really is saying is this: the plan to get Americans back to the moon has changed again. And not in some small, ignorable footnote buried in the margins. The architecture itself is moving. The bones of Artemis are being rearranged while the house is still under construction. Now, the headline version is simple enough. NASA is dropping the long-discussed exploration upper stage for the future versions of SLS and instead moving towards Centaur 5, the upper stage used on ULA's Vulcan rocket. Now, that shift became visible in NASA's imagery tied to the new Artemis framework and was then reinforced by a federal contract listing for, quote, Vulcan Centaur 5 upper stage for Space Launch System, unquote. In plain English, which I cannot apparently pronounce, the moon rocket NASA has spent years promising would evolve one way is now evolving a different way. And that matters because upper stages are not decorative accessories. They are not cup holders in a pickup truck. They are part of the rocket that helps determine how, efficiently a vehicle can finish the job after the brute force climb out of Earth's atmosphere. They will shape payload performance, mission design, cadence, and confidence. Centaur 5, according to Space.com's reporting, carries about twice as much fuel as the interim cryogenic propulsion stage now flying on SLS Block 1, and it uses two RL-10 engines. NASA appears to be betting that a standardized version of SLS built around this new approach is more practical than continuing to upgrade the old path. Sounds like something I said about, a year ago? That one choice plugs directly into the bigger Artemis shakeup. Under the old plan, Artemis 1 through Artemis 3 would use the current SLS configuration with the ICPS upper stage, and later missions would transition to more ambitious Block 1B and Block 2 versions using the Exploration upper stage. Now, NASA is scrapping those upgrades in favor of a standardized SLS configuration. Artemis 4 and Artemis 5 are the missions specifically tied to the new Centaur 5-based setup in the current contract picture. That is not just a hardware change. That is NASA admitting that the old roadmap was carrying too much weight with too many moving parts on a too fragile timeline. Once again, I swore I said that about a year ago. And while all of that was happening, Artemis 2 is suddenly back in the conversation in a bit of a very real way. NASA is saying Artemis 2 moon rocket is now fixed up, allegedly, and could launch as soon as April 1st. No jokes. With additional opportunities from April 2nd through the 6th. And then again later in April and to May if needed. The rollout to the launch pad was scheduled for March 19th, and NASA officials said the engineering teams implemented and qualified a design fix for the quick disconnect hardware issue that has been dogging the vehicle. So while the future of Artemis is being rewritten in broad strokes, the near-term mission is standing there on the pad asking a simple question. Can we go? Can we go yet? Can we fly? Now? Now? Bueller? Now, the contrast is the real story here. On a side note, or on one side, Artemis 2 is almost old-fashioned in its clarity. 4 astronauts, 10 days, 1 loop around the moon and back. It's clean, it's elegant. It's basically Apollo with better computers and much more expensive paperwork. On the other side, Artemis 3 and beyond now look very different from what the public was told not that long ago. Good leadership will do that. Artemis 3 was originally envisioned as the first lunar landing mission targeted for 2028. Now, according to, once again, Space.com, it's been transformed into a 2027 test flight in low Earth orbit, involving Orion and 1 or more lunar landings. Artemis 4 is now the first mission in line, expected to actually land astronauts on the moon, still with the hoped-for date in 2028. Now, that is a remarkable change, and it tells you something important about the state of modern exploration. NASA is no longer pretending that every piece of the system will mature on schedule just because the PowerPoint slides said it would. Starship readiness matters. Blue Moon readiness matters. SLS readiness matters. Orion readiness matters. And when all of these moving parts begin drifting out of sync, the agency has to choose between keeping the old script alive for basically appearances, or saying screw it and rewriting the mission order to fit the actual reality of the situation. And what we are seeing now is NASA choosing reality. Even if reality is a bit awkward, definitely politically messy, and potentially even a little embarrassing. And there's also something revealing in the choice of Centaur 5 itself. Centaur is not flashy. It does not have the mythic swagger of a giant moon rocket brand new from nose to tail. It's actually a little more pragmatic than romantic. More wrench than banner. More, quote, what can we actually fly, unquote, than, this artist rendering looks good. Maybe that is exactly where Artemis, actually should arrive, finally. Not in the age of grand declarations, but in the age of functional compromises. Not the moonshot as pure national myth, but the moonshot as systems integration problems that can be fixed. So the big takeaway tonight is not that NASA picked a part, it's that NASA picked a philosophy. The agency seems to abandon the more elaborate SLS future in favor of a leaner, standardized one, while also reshuffling the mission order so it can keep momentum instead of being trapped by its own promises. Artemis 2 may fly very soon. Artemis 3 is no longer the landing mission many thought it would be. And it's interesting, I had not heard anything about if the crews are going to get adjusted, because Artemis Crew 3 was supposed to be the first humans on the moon for the first time, depending on where you land on that, or again. And it was specifically picked, those 4 astronauts, for, I'll say it, political reasons, not discounting that they're all 4 capable of doing the job, but you know why the 4 were picked. So it'll be interesting to see how, if they will adjust to Artemis 4, that will now be carrying that burden, and the rocket meant to return humans to the moon is once again becoming a different rocket than the one we were even told to expect in the first place. Now, the good news is this does not mean the moon is slipping away. It does mean the road back is being repaved while the convoy is already moving. And in spaceflight, that can either be a sign of collapse or a sign of maturity. Over the next few months, if Artemis 2 actually launches and this new SLS path begins to hold together, we may eventually find out which one of those it is. Now, from shifting the road back to the moon, we turn now to the aging station that will hold humanity's place in low Earth orbit together for a little while longer. Congress wants to keep the ISS flying until 2032. For years, the ISS has existed with an expiration date hanging over it. Everyone knew it was not meant to last forever, and the assumption was by that time retirement actually arrived, something new would be ready to take its place. Commercial stations would begin to rise. NASA would shift into a new role, and the old outpost would finally ease into history. But Congress, those collection of wise men and women, and whatever that one representative is, now seems to be looking at that plan and asking a very reasonable question. Are we actually sure the replacement is ready? So what this story really means is extending the ISS to 2032 is not just a date change, it's a sign that the handoff to the next era does not look solid enough yet. Once again, on paper, the transition sounds amazing. The artist renders chef's kiss. But in reality, the ISS is still doing too much important work to simply assume something better will be there right on time. And we have to admit, this work actually does matter. The station is not just a symbol floating overhead. It is still the most important human laboratory in orbit, despite what the Chinese may say. It is where long-duration spaceflight is studied, where hardware gets tested, where astronauts learn how to live and work off Earth for months at a time, and where there is actual international cooperation that has been forced to function inside a pressurized metal machine moving around the planet at some extraordinary speeds. That kind of experience is not easy to replace, and is definitely not something you want to lose in a gap between programs. And we have to be honest, the gap is a real fear. If the ISS is retired before the next generation of stations is truly operational, then the United States risks losing continuity in low Earth orbit at exactly the wrong moment when the Chinese are starting to excel at it. It's not just about science anymore. Orbit has become infrastructure. It is now strategic, political, commercial, and, dare add, increasingly crowded. A permanent human presence overhead is no longer just a prestige project. It is part of how major powers prove that they belong to the future. Which is why this debate feels bigger than just one station. Yes, the ISS is old, but old doesn't mean useless. Present company, myself, excluded from that. In fact, in spaceflight, old often means it's been tested. It's been put through the ringer. We know how to fix it. It also means understood. It means, we can operate it. We can trust it. And that may not be as glamorous as the next shiny artist render or concept, but it counts for a lot when the alternative comes with a heavy dose of uncertainty. But from that glorious old station circling overhead, let's come back down to terra firma a little bit. Head down to the Texas coast, shall we? Where the biggest rocket in the world is preparing to try to become something more than just a spectacle. Because down at Starbase, the future is once again being welded together in full public view. SpaceX says it is only weeks away from launching the newest and most powerful version of Starship, version 3. And the giant vehicle that has somehow managed to feel both inevitable and wildly unfinished may take flight. And the next version is meant to be taller, stronger, and closer to the machine SpaceX keeps promising will one day carry serious cargo, serious missions, and maybe, eventually, serious human dreams beyond the threshold of Earth. And that's probably why this is fascinating to watch. It's not simply because another big rocket is getting ready to fly, though that is awesome, but because Starship is trying to cross a strange, invisible line. I don't know how else to put that. Kind of between prototype and actual systems. Now, anyone that follows China will know plenty of rockets can be dramatic. There are plenty of tests that can go viral, but becoming infrastructure is a different thing entirely. Infrastructure is not built on one thunderous launch and a shower of dust. It's built on repetition, on reliability, and on the slow and sometimes very ugly process of making the extraordinary start to feel routine. And let's face it, Starship is not routine yet. It is still the giant creature in the surf, still half beast and half blueprint. Still, to some scale, carrying more ambition than actual proof. Every time it rises over the Gulf, it feels like a dare thrown at physics. And every time it fails, the world is reminded that scale does not care about charisma. But every time SpaceX rebuilds, it retests, and rolls another version onto the pad, the company's making the same argument all over again. That giant, fully reusable rockets are not just some whim or fantasy. It's just unfinished engineering. And that is the deeper pulse under this story in my mind. Starship is no longer just trying to impress people. It's trying to mature, trying to get its driver's license. It is trying to become something NASA can lean on for Artemis. Something SpaceX can point toward Mars, and something the broader space world can no longer dismiss as a beautiful stainless steel fever dream. So yes, the promise is enormous. It is a burden. A rocket asked to be a moon lander, a cargo hauler, a Mars transport, and the backbone of a new launch economy that does not get to merely just look impressive. It has to survive contact with reality. So yes, we will watch this next launch, and it will carry a different kind of tension. Not the old question of whether Starship can make noise and fire. We know it can do both quite well. The real question is whether this new version begins to feel like progress with any real rhythm. Whether the machine is learning, whether the chaos could be narrowing, and whether the future SpaceX keeps selling is finally starting to look less like a trailer and more like the opening scene of the real thing. And if it works, once again, even partly, then the meaning of Starship changes again. It becomes a little less mythical, a little less absurd, and a little more dangerous, but in the best possible way. Dangerous to old assumptions about how often we can fly, about how much we can lift, and how far away deep space really is or isn't. Because once a machine this large begins to improve on purpose and not just in theory, the horizon to it all moves. Now, that does lead us into the next story. Because of course it does.
And now, assholes in space!
China is asshole! China is asshole! China is asshole! China is asshole!
So China is now looking at the Ramey-Baudet, I don't care how you say it, I just like saying Ramey-Baudet, on the moon's near side as a possible landing region for its first astronauts. And the site is being described as a kind of geological museum. That is the polite scientific version. The less polite version, as China is not just staring lovingly at moon rocks for the beauty of the thing. China is doing what major powers do when they smell leverage, prestige, and future advantage. It is a picking ground. And that is why what they're doing matters. A landing site is never just a landing site. It comes with a declaration. It is a flag planted first in the planning room, long before it ever reaches the dust. Once a nation starts narrowing in on a specific region, the dream has moved out of the brochure stage. It has now entered logistics. It becomes mapping. It becomes intent with coordinates. Now, to be fair, Ramey-Baudet really does sound scientifically interesting. The geological museum is not, it's not a sort of a phrase people use on some random patch of dead gray rubble. It suggests a place where the moon's history is laid out in layers, fractures, and ancient features that are worth studying. Fine. Great. Wonderful. Science is good. We like science. But let us not pretend the Chinese state is wandering moonward with like a harmless professor with a rock hammer and a notebook. This is about power, visibility, and arriving early enough to shape the rules before somebody else does, looking at us, America. And let's face it, the moon is changing. It is no longer just the old Apollo destination, parked in memory and dripping with nostalgia. It has become strategic again, or for the first time, depending on your point of view. Useful again, political again. The conversation now is not merely who can get there, but who can stay, who can build, who can operate, and who gets to act like the place was always theirs in the first place. And let's face it, China understands that all too well. This is why we need to sit up a little bit straighter and take notice. Yes, this is a fun segment where we call China is asshole. But there's, behind the humor to it, there is a real threat. China has been very good at making big ambitions start to feel patient, steady, and bound to happen. It's no constant carnival barking to try to get your attention. No endless shouting. It's been a long march of capability, step by step, with some missteps here and there, until one day everyone looks up and realizes that the thing that sounded distant is all of a sudden very real. How many people realize they're like on their 5th crew turnaround for their own space station? Most people probably still think it was only last year they put that thing in, but they're actually on their 5th 6-month crew rotation. They do have that station in orbit, with more astronauts, more operations, and more plans coming. And now, with a possible human landing site on the moon with a name attached to it, this isn't just dust in the wind. It's not nothing. So whenever you hear Rime Vado, even though that's incorrect, when you hear the actual Rimaebode, I just like pronouncing it like a, certain Marvel character's name. You shouldn't hear only a scientific target. You should hear a marker in the larger contest. Hear the sound of another power choosing its place in the next lunar chapter. Hear the slow, methodical movement of a government that would very much like to be treated as inevitable in space, the same way it wants to be treated in everything else it does. China is not asking permission to be part of the new moon age. China is acting like a nation that intends to arrive, work, and claim relevance, whether anyone is comfortable with it or not, and they don't care how they do it. Now, this doesn't mean that panic is or isn't useful, and it doesn't. What it does mean is complacency. It's stupid. So while this area may be a geological museum, it also is something else now. It is a reminder that the moon is not ours anymore. And we have to start acting like it. Now, thankfully, we do have the U.S. Space Force. Think of it what you will. But they did just move a GPS launch to SpaceX Falcon due to Vulcan rocket glitch. Because, once again, sometimes the future, it can come in with a whimper, and sometimes it can come in with a roar. Sometimes it arrives with a memo, a schedule change, and somebody muttering under their breath in a control room that you hope one day gets aired live. So yes, the U.S. Space Force has moved a GPS mission over to SpaceX Falcon 9 because Vulcan hit a glitch. Now, to some, this may sound like a small bureaucratic shuffle until you actually stop and give it real thought. GPS is not some side project. It is part of the invisible machinery of modern life, especially for, say, the United States Space Force. Phones, aircraft, shipping, timing networks, military systems, finance, logistics, emergency response, all of it leans in one way or another on satellites that most people never give a second thought or even a first thought about Unless, of course, they lose signal in a parking garage and start to yell obscenities all over the place. So when a launch tied to a network for the U.S. Space Force gets moved, the story is not merely about moving one rocket, getting the nod over another. It's about trust, readiness, and, well, who gets the call when something important absolutely, positively has to be there. And right now, whether people want to admit it or not, more often than not, that call seems to end up with, hey, Elon, can you help? So SpaceX has become the default answer when timing matters and payloads cannot afford to sit around waiting for someone else to get their shit together. Now, this does not mean Falcon 9 is magic. It means the cadence and reliability matters. Being able to launch again and again and again with a machine people fully understand, it just matters more. And we are reminded that sometimes little lessons can be hidden in stories like this. As 2 stories ago, there is a bit of romance around a new rocket, the newest system, the next great platform. But when national infrastructure is on the line, romance gets thrown out the window to basically whoever can actually roll to the pad, fuel the vehicle, and get the payload where it needs to go. It's not glamorous. It's just the truth of it. And the truth has a way of handing the crown to the provider that can deliver today and not, maybe someday. And there's also something almost funny in this contrast. We live in an age that loves to talk about Mars cities, lunar bases, giant reusable ships leaping across the solar system. Yet here, down in engine rooms of actual space operations, the story is still wonderfully a bit old-fashioned. One rocket had a problem, so the mission got moved to the truck that starts every morning. No fanfare, no poetry from the procurement office. Just the cold logic of needing that job done and that truck sitting out there and ready to go. So yes, on the surface, this is simply a GPS launch moving from Vulcan to Falcon 9 after a glitch. But underneath that small change is a much larger truth that we have to remember about the era we are living in. Space is not a spectacle. It can absolutely be. But it shouldn't be treated like it is all the time. It really has become logistics and infrastructure. It is capability measured not only by some grand vision, but by who can be counted on when the clock is running and the payload cannot wait. And time again, that answer seems to be steering toward a Falcon, though we do have to applaud Morgan and whatever company she works with. Joking, Firefly Aerospace, they did have a successful launch and everything went amazingly beautiful with the launch and on screen. But before we drift into the stranger half of the night, we need to make one last stop in the world of contracts. Rocket Lab has landed a $190 million launch deal tied to hypersonic testing for the U.S. military. And while that may not have the gravitas of a moonshot or that stainless steel swagger of Starship, it is the kind of information that tells you where the modern space economy is actually moving. Because not every important story is about planting flags or building the colony. Some are just about, once again, who gets trusted to fly when speed, precision, and national security all start sitting at the same table. So Rocket Lab has spent years building a reputation as one of the more nimble and disciplined players. They are actually making a great name for themselves. It is not trying to be the loudest company in a room. It is trying to be the one that shows up prepared, flies often, and keeps expanding in the markets that used to feel reserved for, well, SpaceX. And a contract like this suggests that maybe, just maybe, that strategy is starting to work. And let's be real, hypersonic testing is not some tiny niche tucked away in a Pentagon filing cabinet. Hypersonics sit right at the uneasy intersection of aerospace ambition and, military urgency. These are systems meant to move at absurd, extreme speeds through brutal conditions with very little room for failure and less patience for delay. So, when a company gets chosen to support this kind of work, it does actually say something. We still talk about rockets as, at least the general public, as if they're still mostly symbols. Sometimes symbols of national pride, symbols of big dreams. You see the giant plumes over the horizon, and yes, they are all of that. But more and more, we're not shocked to see a UPS truck, a FedEx truck, USPS occasionally, when we passed them on the road 6-7 times a day. When before we maybe saw it once. Now we see Amazon trucks all over the place. And more, rockets are becoming logistic platforms for governments, defense agencies, scientists, and private industry alike. They are part truck, part launch rail, and part infrastructure, whether anyone wants to really admit it or not. Which means the companies that win are not always the ones with, well, the biggest names attached to it, the flashiest designs. They are just the ones that somewhere along the way became dependable. And though I haven't talked about them as much on the show, because there isn't anything flashy, and let's face it, people like to turn in the podcast for a little bit of flash. They have been moving in this direction for a while now. They took the time to build their name with small launches, small payloads, and the faster, more agile kind of mission profile than the old giants were built around. But stories like this show something else that's smaller. Well, it no longer means less important. We live in a world where specialized missions actually matter, where testing matters, where rapid access matters more and more and more. And a nimble company can become strategically significant without ever pretending it is the only game in town. So this $190 million deal is more than a paycheck. It is a marker. It tells us and everyone, Rocket Lab is continuing to climb, continuing to diversify, and continuing to win work that places it closer to the hard center of modern aerospace rather than just the decorative edges. And at a time when the sky's filling up with more missions, more competition, and more strategic meaning, I have to say this kind of positioning matters. And with that, let's all take a 5-minute break, grab a drink, or take a couple sips of the one you have next to you. Give your lady, if you have one, a hug and kiss. Make sure your kid's okay. And we will be right back. And welcome back. I was able to get half of my beer drunk, so I'm happy now. But as the stars return as we come back, we leave behind the machinery of Earth and we head out to the cold dark where even asteroids are more alive than they have any real right to be. Far from speeches, contracts, launch pads, and polished missions patches, the universe is still behaving like itself. Which is to say, strangely, violently, and, well, with a flair for imagery no public relations department on Earth could ever improve. NASA's DART mission, which first made headlines by deliberately slamming a spacecraft into an asteroid, is still giving us new reasons to stare. And one of the latest, actually, I gotta say, has a beautiful little phrase attached to it. Cosmic snowballs. That is what researchers are now seeing in the aftermath of that impact. Not just dust drifting lazily away, not just a clean scar on a silent rock, but material being tossed about in ways that suggest these small bodies are not inert little gravel heaps waiting passively for the end of time. That they may and are, well, seemingly dynamic. That they're reactive. They are, in their own rough and ancient way, expressive. Hit one hard enough, and the system answers back. And there's something humbling about that in a weird way. We tend to imagine asteroids as kind of leftovers, as debris, as cosmic attic junk left behind after the real work of planet building was done with. But the more we study them, the less they feel like trash, and the more they feel like records. They seem to have memories inside them. Memory of collisions, memory of heat, memory of the early solar system when everything was still raw, unfinished, and colliding with everything else in the frenziest game of pool you can imagine. And DART, for all its practical purposes as a planetary defense mission, has done something kind of neat. It did not merely test whether humanity could nudge a dangerous object off course. It also revealed that when you strike one of these wandering stones, the response, well, it can be messy, surprising, and unexpectedly delicate. And cosmic snowballs is such a lovely contradiction. For snow suggests softness, silence, and maybe a little bit of drifting, as Mother Nature is currently doing outside my window. F you, Mother Nature. But these are fragments born of impact flung through space by violence, glimmering out from a wound. Now, hopefully that image lingers because it tells us something about the universe we do live in. Space, for far too many times, is often described as empty. And yes, in one sort of way, space is empty. But don't confuse empty with dead. It's not static. It is full of motion, consequence, and long chains of cause and effect that keep unfolding even when no one is there to watch it. A small asteroid struck by a human machine becomes a cloud of ejected material. That cloud becomes new data. That data now becomes new understanding. And suddenly, one little collision carried out millions of miles from home become part of the long human attempt to read the temperament of the solar system. Now, that's all lovely and almost painting a brush as well as already does. But there is a practical side of this as well. If we are ever going to defend Earth from a truly dangerous asteroid, we need to know not just whether we can hit one, but how these bodies behave when they are hit. Are they solid, loose, cooperative, fragile? Do they absorb force? Do they shed it? Do they come apart in predictable ways? Or do they answer like a bag of rubble wrapped around a secret? Those are not academic questions if one day the object in our sights is not a test target, but a threat with our planet's name already written in the math. But even outside that urgency, there is wonder here, because in that phrase, cosmic snowballs, the universe briefly becomes legible to the heart as well as it is to the mind. You can picture in your brain the cosmic snowballs, tiny, bright fragments spraying through the black like winter shaken loose from a stone. a snowfall no wind will ever touch, a glittering aftermath suspended in the oldest silence we know. So somewhere out there in the long dark between worlds, fragments are still flying from human-made strike, bright as frost and sunlight, telling us that even the smallest bodies in the solar system have stories to give up if we take the time to ask. Now, there is something beautifully backward about this next story. If you want to look further into the universe, you would think the answer would be height. A mountaintop, a satellite, a great silver eye turned upward for some remote and frozen place. But sometimes the best way to hear the oldest whispers in existence is not to climb, it's actually to go down, deep down, beneath rock, beneath weather, beneath the noise of the living world. Yes, a second story on China. Because in China, far underground, scientists are preparing a detector that may one day catch something extraordinary. Neutrinos from stars that died before the Earth ever existed. Okay. What does this mean? Well, it speaks to just how strange the act of observation can become when things you are chasing are nearly massless, nearly invisible, and moving through existence as if matter were, well, it's just a polite suggestion, not an actual thing. Neutrinos are among the quietest travelers in the known cosmos. Now, they are born in violent places: nuclear reactions, stellar collapse, furnaces of the sun, death throes of massive stars. And then they flee, streaming outward in unimaginable numbers. Most of them pass through everything, through dust, through planets, through your body, through mine, through the whole Earth as if it were barely there. Trillions of them do it every second. And almost none of them so much as even stop to ask how you're doing. And that is why these detectors actually have to be hidden underground. Not to get closer to the signal, but to get away from everything else. The deeper you go, the more the Earth itself becomes a shield, protecting the instrument from stray interferences, from the chatter of cosmic rays, from the constant static of a universe that is full of way too many things happening at once. Down there in the dark, the detector can just wait for one of the rare interactions that says, "Psst, something ancient just passed through here." It's not difficult to be moved by this, because it's not just astronomy in the ordinary sense. This is like archaeology without the ruins. It's like paleontology without bones. It is the search for evidence from a chapter of the cosmic history so old that even stars, those great burning monarchs of time, were already dying before our little world had learned to spin beneath a living sky. But there's also something deeply human in this effort. We bury a machine in darkness so that it can catch the faintest traces of a vanished fire. We sink beneath mountains to listen for the dead. We build cathedrals of silence in order to hear particles that do not want to be heard. And if we're being honest, right now, from our understanding, there is no survival advantage in any of this. There's no immediate profit. No simple use can be garnered. It is the kind of project a species undertakes only after it has begun to realize that understanding is one of the few ways to answer the loneliness of being conscious in a universe this old. Because yes, this feels kind of like hauntings. Not in the childish sense of rattling chains and pale figures in the hallways, but in a bit of a deeper, grander sense, filled with remnants and traces, with the surviving breath of those things long gone, and who knows what else travels with them. So yes, somewhere beneath China, in a chamber cut away from the sunlight and time, a detector waits in patient darkness for particles from dead stars older than Earth. And I hate saying it, but it's true. If this succeeds, China will have done something quite remarkable. They will have listened through stone for the ghost of ancient suns and actually heard an answer. And maybe somewhere, not from a star that has died, maybe it never had a star of its own. Because there are things in our universe we are still trying and struggling to understand. Things such as a rogue planet. Rogue planets are a world without a sun. It does not circle a star, it does not sit in a neat, familiar system with seasons and daylight and a warm center holding everything in place. It drifts. Maybe it was thrown out of its own system long ago. Maybe it formed all together on its own. Either way, it's moving through interstellar darkness, untethered, cold, and seemingly cut off from every condition we usually associate with any form of life. Now, at first glance, this would sound like the end of a conversation. No star means no sunlight. No sunlight means no warmth on the surface. No warmth means no oceans, no weather, no forest, no easy chemistry unfolding under a bright sky. A rogue planet sounds it sounds less like a destination and more like a cosmic corpse, still moving but long past any hope of being called alive. But that may not be the whole picture. The question scientists are asking is not whether the surface of one of these worlds would be pleasant. It would not be. The question is whether moons orbiting such planets might still hold on to enough internal heat to keep water liquid beneath thick ice. Once liquid water enters any discussion, even in darkness, well, the helm and the book are picked up, and that door may open a little bit. That's an inside joke for a handful of you. Now, we already know our solar system gives us examples of this kind of possibility. Europa and Enceladus are not warm places, yet they remain interesting because beneath their frozen exteriors, there may be subsurface oceans kept active by internal heating. Gravity can squeeze a moon, flexing its interior and generating heat, and radioactive decay can help, of course. Thick ice can act like insulation. Putting these things together in a moon that looks frozen and dead from the outside, well, it could actually have an ocean inside of it. Now, this is, Lost Wanderer. So from hidden oceans in a starless dark, we come to an older and perhaps stranger question. One thing that has been hanging over every telescope antenna and hopeful little signal we have ever pointed into the night. For a long, long time, the question has usually been framed one way. Where are all the white women at? Or paraphrase for the science community, where is everybody? The galaxy is old. The stars are many. Planets, well, they appear to be common. And if life is not some impossible accident that happened only once in a small world and one rather nervous species, then the silence starts to feel almost theatrical. Yet we keep listening, and the sky keeps refusing to answer. And eventually somebody always says, maybe there's nobody out there. But that's not the only answer. Another possibility is far less comforting to most people's egos. It may not be that the universe is empty, it's that nobody's interested in speaking with Earthlings. The silence may not be the silence of absence, it may be the silence of avoidance. Now, before Earthlings get too offended, it is worth admitting that there is a certain logic to this idea. Look at us from a distance. We are clever, yes, curious, yes, capable of art, science, love, sacrifice, beauty, and astonishing acts of imagination. We are also loud, tribal, erratic, heavily armed, and not always especially mature. We are the sort of civilization that can split the atom, map the cosmic microwave background, and then immediately use the same species-wide brain power to scream at each other on the internet over sandwiches and sports mascots. If an older intelligence were quietly surveying the galaxy, it may not look at Earth and think, yeah, this is an ideal first contact. So that possibility changes the emotional shape of the old alien question. Because once you stop assuming science means emptiness, the whole thing becomes less lonely and more unnerving. The galaxy might be inhabited and still closed to everyone. It might be full of watchers, cautious civilizations, or societies that long ago learned that announcing yourself to every unknown listener in the dark is stupid. It might even be that intelligence does not naturally rush outward waving hello. Maybe they're introverts. Maybe it's because more time makes them more careful, more selective, more aware that not every stranger deserves your address, your mixtape, your nudes. And there is a bit of a hard lesson in that. Human beings often imagine contact as some sort of reward. We discover radio, build observatories, point dishes into space, and quietly assume that if anyone is out there, they would naturally want to meet us. But that assumption says more about us than it does about them. We think curiosity should be answered because, well, we asked the question, didn't we? We keep forgetting that the universe is under no obligation to be flattered by our advances, our mixtape, our nudes. And yet the silence remains fascinating precisely because it leaves room for so many possibilities and probabilities. But let's not forget, too, for a long time, habitability was treated almost like some sort of real estate. You look for the right neighborhood, the right distance from a star, the right temperature, maybe a little water, maybe a stable orbit. And if the cosmic zoning laws all line up, then perhaps life gets a chance. Now, yes, this model still matters, but the deeper astronomy actually goes, the most obvious answer becomes that the universe may actually not be as nearly as tidy as everyone would love it to be. We have to keep that in mind when we think about all of this. And it may be one of the strangest comforts science has us available, that the universe may be cold beyond measure, but it also could be full of billions and trillions of shelters, quiet pockets, buried seas, dark refuges where chemistry goes on patiently unseen. If that is true, then life, well, it may be out there, but we're not mature enough yet. And now, let's move on to the Celestial Watch, shall we? For the next 2 weeks, the sky gives us one date worth circling in ink. Wednesday, April 1st, when the full next moon arrives. In the common almanac tradition, it is the pink moon. In the Anishinabek season naming tradition, it is the Bopugama Gises. I swear EP hates torturing me, or likes torturing me. It's the broken snowshoe moon. That is your big silver floodlight night. The moon will look full in the evenings and around it too. But April 1st is the peak. It is beautiful for moon gazing, great for moonlit landscapes, and hard on the faint stuff because once that much moonlight fills the sky, dim stars and deep sky targets get pushed back into the background. There is also one wild card in the mix, Comet C 2026A1 MAPS. It makes its close pass by the sun around April 4th, and if it survives, it actually could brighten dramatically. But this is not a casual backyard comet to point at for the neighbors. It stays too close to the sun for safe normal viewing, so this will be one that you'll have to require astronomy sites and scientific sites to get the best images for, but stay alert for it. So that's it for tonight's transmission. Thank you for tuning in whenever and however you do. Please stay tuned for Alan Ray coming up next. Special thanks to NASA, SpaceX, Space.com, Ars Technica, Popular Mechanics, and everyone out there keeping humanity's eyes on the stars. With me at the helm, the EP plotting our next course, and the ship's computer in the back, whispering star maps through the static, this has been the Lost Wanderer podcast. Until next orbit, I hope you enjoyed the show, learned a little something, and maybe had a laugh or two as well.